The first sound to pierce the carefully constructed quiet of Ben Carter's assumed life was a thud. Faint, rhythmic, muffled. It seeped through the insulated walls of his rented suburban house in Cedar Ridge Preserve, an irregular beat against the otherwise serene afternoon. He was Ben Cooper here, a freelance software developer, seeking quiet inspiration in convenient fiction. His real life, a high-stakes, deeply embedded undercover operation targeting a volatile domestic extremist cell miles away, was a secret locked tighter than any vault. This house, this persona, were merely tools, an unassuming base. The thudding, he initially dismissed it. A neighbor's late summer DIY project, perhaps. Annoying, but ignorable. Then came another sound, a sound that didn't just prickle the hairs on the back of his neck. It sent an icy tendril straight down his spine. A child's vocalization, not a laugh, not a cry of typical play or childish frustration. This was a high-pitched, ululating, keen a sound of profound, almost primal distress. His training years spent dissecting the nuances of human behavior under duress recognized it instantly. Acute fear, possibly pain. A deeper, more fundamental instinct, the one that predated any FBI badge, screamed danger. The sound seemed to be emanating from the house directly across the street. The immaculate, oppressively perfect residence of Mrs. Agnes Sterling, bordered by obsessively manicured roses. Agnes Sterling, the undisputed matriarch, the chief enforcer, the iron-willed queen of the Cedar Ridge homeowners. Association. Ben moved to his front window, his movements fluid, casual, betraying none of the sudden tension gripping him. His gaze ostensibly taking in the tranquil tree-lined street was a laser. He saw Agnes Sterling emerge from her side yard, her posture ramrod straight. Her face, usually a mask of serene, implacable authority, was set in lines of tight-lipped, grim satisfaction. It was a chilling expression. She bent down to the heavy slanted basement storm doors, the kind often found on older homes. She fussed with something metallic, her movements precise, economical. Then, with a decisive, sharp click that carried with unnerving clarity across the quiet street, she snapped a heavy brass padlock into place. She straightened, gave the newly secured doors a firm testing tug, then turned and walked with unhurried composure back towards her front porch. She was oblivious to his observation, or so it seemed. A child, distressed, locked in a basement, by her. The central sickening question slammed into Ben's mind with the force of a physical blow. Why, in God's name, was Agnes Sterling imprisoning a child, and whose child was it? A cold fury, unwelcome and dangerous to his cover, began to smolder deep within him. His mission parameters screamed, observe, do not engage. His gut screamed, protect. Ben Carter, known in the meticulously curated enclave of Cedar Ridge Preserve as the quiet, somewhat reclusive Ben Cooper, lived a life of stark, jarring bifurcation. His days were a carefully constructed artifice, a tapestry woven from threads of mundane routine. He wrote lines of code for imaginary clients, took long solitary walks with a non-existent dog, a prop, a leash and collar hung by the door to explain his occasional necessary neighborhood strolls. He exchanged polite, brief, and deliberately distant nods, with neighbors fostering an image of benign, uninteresting solitude. His nights, and indeed many of his carefully guarded days, were consumed by the meticulous, nerve-wracking, and dangerous reality of his FBI surveillance operation. He was tracking a well-armed, ideologically fanatical group miles from Cedar Ridge, using this quiet suburban rental as an unassuming, low-profile operational base. Cedar Ridge Preserve was the epitome of affluent, controlled, and often suffocatingly conformist living. Its bylaws were voluminous, a sacred text of restrictions. Its aesthetic, a rigidly enforced palette of muted colors and prescribed landscaping, was fiercely, almost religiously policed by its powerful HOA. And at the helm of that HOA, reigning with an iron fist and a velvet glove, though the velvet was wearing thin for some, was Agnes Sterling. She was a woman of indeterminate age, always impeccably, almost severely dressed. Her silver hair was invariably styled in an elegant but austere chignon. Her pronouncements on community standards on what was and was not acceptable in Cedar Ridge were delivered with the unshakable conviction of divine right, as if handed down from a higher authority only she could perceive. Into this meticulously ordered, almost sterile world, the Williams family had recently, and to Agnes Sterling, disruptively arrived. Maya Williams, a warm, intelligent, articulate woman working as a hospital administrator, and her 8-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was autistic. He was a bright, engaging, curious child, but he processed the world, its myriad stimuli, differently. He sometimes communicated non-verbally, especially when overwhelmed or deeply focused. His joy, his excitement often expressed itself in enthusiastic flapping of his hands or intricate, repetitive patterns of movement, stimming behaviors that were a natural, necessary, and often beautiful part of his way of being in the world. These very behaviors Ben had observed with a growing, sickening unease from behind his own carefully neutral Ben Cooper facade had already drawn Agnes Sterling's laser-like, intensely disapproving scrutiny. He'd seen her watching them. Her eyes, like chips of ice, would follow Ethan, a flicker of something cold and sharp in their depths. The first open, undeniable confrontation, the inciting incident in what would rapidly escalate into a terrifying ordeal, had occurred just a week after the Williams family moved in. Ethan, momentarily overwhelmed by the unfamiliar cacophony of sounds and the swirling kaleidoscope of sights at the community park during a crowded Saturday afternoon, had experienced a brief, intense meltdown. He'd sat abruptly on the grass, rocking back and forth, his small hands clamped tightly over his ears, emitting a series of high-pitched, distressed vocalizations. It was the sound of a system overloaded, seeking desperate release. Maya had been instantly by his side, her movements calm, practiced her voice a low, soothing murmur, gently guiding him through the sensory storm, her love a visible shield. Agnes Sterling, who had been observing from a nearby park bench like a predatory hawk, watching a field mouse, had descended upon them. Mrs. Williams. Agnes's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a distinct, penetrating chill that sliced through the park's otherwise cheerful, sun-dappled ambience. Heads had turned. "I must insist you control your child. This sort of public display is deeply unsettling to the other residents. It is simply not acceptable in Cedar Ridge." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Maya, though visibly taken aback, her shoulders stiffening at the aggressive, accusatory tone, responded with remarkable calm, her voice firm but polite. "Mrs. Sterling, my son is autistic. He was feeling overwhelmed by the noise in the crowd. He wasn't harming anyone. He was just trying to cope." "Autistic or not," Agnes had countered, her pale eyes like chips of glacial ice, her expression unyielding. "There are standards of public decorum. This community values peace and order above all else. These outbursts are disruptive." But she paused, letting her words sink in her gaze, sweeping from Maya to Ethan, who was now quiet, but still trembling in his mother's embrace. "Perhaps," Agnes continued, her voice dropping further, laced with a distinct, unmistakable menace, "if you cannot manage his condition, then Cedar Ridge is not the appropriate environment for your family. There are HOA bylaws, Mrs. Williams, regarding disruptive behavior, and I assure you they will be enforced vigorously." The thinly veiled racism, Maya was black, Agnes was white, a dynamic not lost on Ben, and the blatant cruel ableism inherent in her pronouncements, the outright threat of using HOA power to harass them, had been shocking in its undisguised malice. Ben, ostensibly engrossed in a thick paperback on a nearby bench, his senses as always fully engaged, recording, analyzing his surroundings, had logged the interaction with a cold, hard knot of anger tightening in his chest. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA enforcer flexing her petty authority. This was targeted, calculated malice. This was something darker. In the days that followed that ugly park incident, Agnes Sterling launched a systematic, insidious campaign of harassment, clearly designed to isolate, intimidate, and ultimately drive the Williams family out of Cedar Ridge. She began by spreading poisonous, insidious rumors among the more impressionable, or perhaps equally prejudiced residents of the community. Whispers slithered through the neighborhood, carefully curated comments about Ethan being unpredictable, potentially aggressive, or that his very presence, his harmless stimming, was lowering the tone and adversely affecting property values. Frivolous, nitpicking complaints started appearing in Maya's mailbox almost daily. They were handwritten with perfect spidery calligraphy on Agnes's distinctive, expensive, cream-colored stationery, each one a tiny poisoned dart. Alleged violations for excessive noise, when Ethan was merely humming happily to himself in his own backyard, a joyful melodic sound. Citations for the unapproved aesthetic of a brightly colored sensory swing Maya had installed on their small porch, a swing that brought Ethan visible comfort and calm. Agnes, wielding her considerable influence like a cudgel, successfully lobbied the HOA board, a board largely composed of timid individuals cowed by her dominance or quietly sharing her prejudices, to deny Maya's reasonable request. Maya had wanted to install a small, unobtrusive privacy fence around their modest backyard. It was a simple request, a fence Maya had hoped would provide Ethan with a more secure, predictable, and calming outdoor space, a sanctuary where he could move and play freely without fear of judgment or triggering Agnes's ire. It would disrupt the harmonious, open-plan aesthetic of Cedar Ridge. Agnes had argued decisively, almost regally at the board meeting, her pronouncements met with a chorus of deferential nervous nods from other board members. Such barriers foster division, not community. One board member, a nervous man named Arthur Jenkins, had tried to weakly suggest a compromise, but Agnes had silenced him with a single withering glare. This relentless, suffocating bullying was clearly unequivocally intended to make the Williams family feel unwelcome, ostracized, and constantly under siege. It was designed to deprive them of peace, of community support, of the simple right to exist comfortably in their own home, to effectively bully them into leaving. Ben had seen this pattern before in different contexts: the othering, the systematic erosion of support. It was a classic tactic of oppression, now playing out on a manicured suburban stage. The situation took a far darker, more terrifying and sickeningly irreversible turn on a warm, deceptively tranquil Tuesday afternoon. Ethan, a child whose gentle curiosity was as boundless as the sky, and who possessed a tendency to wander if something beautiful or intriguing caught his attention, particularly if he was feeling anxious or dysregulated, had been playing quietly in his own front yard. Maya, his ever-watchful mother, had stepped inside their small house for just a moment, literally 60 seconds, to answer an urgent phone call from the hospital where she worked. In that brief, fateful interval, a brightly colored monarch butterfly, its wings, of vibrant orange and black, had flitted past Ethan, dancing on the gentle breeze. Ethan, captivated by its beauty, his anxieties momentarily forgotten, had followed it, his small feet padding softly on the grass. The butterfly, in its innocent, unknowing flight, led him across his own lawn, and then catastrophically onto the immaculate, putting green perfect and fiercely guarded expanse of Agnes Sterling's front yard. Agnes, who had been meticulously pruning her prize-winning roses with an almost surgical obsessive precision, her sharp shears glinting in the afternoon sun, saw him. To her, in her warped proprietary perception, this was not an innocent neurodivergent child momentarily harmlessly straying a few feet onto her grass. This was a deliberate trespass, a flagrant violation of her sacred domain, the final intolerable provocation in her ongoing escalating battle to preserve standards and rid her perfect neighborhood of this unsuitable family. Instead of gently redirecting Ethan back to his own yard, a few simple steps away, or calling out to Maya, whose voice she could likely hear from the open window of the Williams house, Agnes Sterling acted with a chilling, horrifying, premeditated cruelty. Witnesses, two elderly neighbors gossiping on their porch further down the street, their initial accounts hesitant and confused until pieced together later, described seeing Agnes speak to Ethan. Her voice, they said, was initially soft, almost sweet, a stark contrast to her usual stern demeanor. Perhaps she was luring him, coaxing him with the promise of seeing more butterflies or a special flower in her secluded backyard. Then they saw her firmly, unyieldingly take his small arm. She led him not towards his own home, but with a determined pace around the side of her house, towards the shadowed area where the basement entrance lay hidden from the street. Ethan, likely confused by the sudden shift in her tone, increasingly anxious at being led away by this stern, imposing woman whose disapproval he had undoubtedly sensed, had begun to make those distinctive, high-pitched, distressed vocalizations. The same terrible sounds Ben had heard moments ago. That was when Agnes Sterling, her face set in a grim, determined mask, had forced a bewildered, terrified, and now struggling autistic child into her dark, musty, cobweb-filled basement and locked him in. It was an act of stunning, almost unbelievable brutality, an illegal imprisonment, a kidnapping, born of pure, unadulterated malice, a grotesque, terrifying sense of entitlement, and a profound, chilling disconnect from basic human decency. Ben Carter, his senses still ringing with the echoes of that child's desperate, terrified sounds, and the damning, unforgettable visual of Agnes Sterling, callously snapping that heavy brass padlock into place, felt a surge of cold, unadulterated fury. It threatened, for a dangerous, heart-stopping moment, to overwhelm his carefully cultivated, deeply ingrained undercover persona, the discipline of years. His primary mission, the sole reason he was embedded in this seemingly tranquil suburban landscape of Cedar Ridge, was critical. It involved months of painstaking, perilous work, tracking a cell that posed a significant national security threat. Direct interference in a local matter, especially one as potentially explosive as this one that could expose him, blow his cover and jeopardize the entire operation, was against every meticulously drilled protocol. His handlers would be furious. But this was not merely a local matter. This was an active kidnapping, a felony child endangerment, an immediate and profound threat to the life and safety of a vulnerable, disabled child. There was no real choice to make. Not for Ben Carter, the man beneath the Ben Cooper mask. His sworn duty as a federal law enforcement officer, his basic visceral humanity, superseded all other operational considerations in this horrific, unfolding moment. Ethan's terrified keening echoed in his mind, a silent scream demanding action. He moved with swift, economical, practiced efficiency, the years of training taking over. Retreating from the window, his mind already racing through tactical options, he activated a secure, heavily encrypted communication link on his burner phone, bypassing local channels and connecting directly to the FBI's regional field office. This is Special Agent Ben Carter operative call sign, Night Owl. His voice was low, urgent, stripped bare of any lingering Ben Cooper affectation. It was the voice of a man in absolute control facing a critical incident. I have an active 10-53 repeat code 1053 kidnapping and child endangerment in progress at my current surveillance location. Primary target is not involved. This is an emergent separate incident. He paused, took a steadying breath. Victim is a minor autistic male, approximately 8 years old, name Ethan Williams. Suspect is adult female Agnes Sterling, resident at 12 Willow Lane, Cedar Ridge Preserve. Child is currently unlawfully imprisoned in the basement of suspect's residence, padlocked from the outside. His words were clipped precise. Request immediate tactical response. Hostage rescue team protocols are indicated. This is not a drill. I assess the child's life and well-being are in imminent danger. Suspect Sterling has exhibited escalating aggressive behavior towards the child and his mother. He provided a quick, concise summary of what he had witnessed. The luring, the forced entry, the padlock, the child's distinct distress calls. He gave the known layout of Agnes's house from his casual but professional observations, noting potential entry points and vulnerabilities. The response from the watch commander at the other end was immediate, professional, and chillingly calm. Received Night Owl. Tactical mobilizing. Sit tight. Do not engage unless child's life is in immediate direct peril. Local LEOs will be looped for perimeter. HRTETA 15 mics. Help was coming, fast. The midpoint twist was not just the sudden, stark revelation of Ben's true identity and capability to his agency in this unexpected, volatile context, but the cataclysmic, reality-shattering shift about to obliterate Agnes Sterling's meticulously ordered world. She had imprisoned a child, an act she likely considered a justifiable, if perhaps extreme form of neighborhood discipline, a righteous assertion of her authority. She had absolutely no inkling, no possible way of knowing that her quiet, unassuming, seemingly harmless new neighbor was a highly trained, deeply embedded FBI special agent. She could not imagine that her cruel, impulsive act had just triggered a full-scale federal law enforcement response that was at that very moment mobilizing with overwhelming, unstoppable force to descend upon her pristine, rose-bordered doorstep. Her reign of suburban terror was about to come to a very abrupt, very public, and very decisive end. Ben glanced back at Agnes's house. The thudding from the basement had stopped. Only a terrible waiting silence remained. His heart hammered. 15 minutes. The arrival of the FBI hostage rescue team, augmented by a cordon of local sheriff's deputies who had been immediately discreetly looped in by the Bureau, was a study in controlled, overwhelming chaos. It was a sudden, shocking, almost surreal eruption of federal might into the sleepy, sun-dappled, and utterly unprepared afternoon of Cedar Ridge Preserve. Unmarked black vans and heavily armored SUVs, their emergency lights now flashing in a bewildering kaleidoscope of red and blue, but their sirens initially silent to maintain the crucial element of surprise, converged on Willow Lane with breathtaking speed and military precision. Heavily armed agents clad in black tactical gear, helmets, and body armor deployed with a silent, deadly efficiency that spoke of endless drills and real-world experience. They moved like wraiths, securing intersections, establishing a tight perimeter. Neighbors drawn by the sudden influx of vehicles and stern-faced men with rifles began to appear on their porches, their faces etched with confusion and dawning alarm. Whispers started. "What on earth is happening? Is it a drug bust?" Agnes Sterling was in her sunroom, a bright, airy space at the rear of her house, overlooking her meticulously tended backyard. She was calmly sipping iced tea, a tall glass beaded with condensation, and leisurely reading a glossy gardening magazine, perhaps dreaming of next year's prize-winning roses. She was utterly blissfully oblivious to the heavily armed storm, gathering just outside her pristine white picket fence, a storm about to shatter her self-constructed kingdom. Ben Carter, his undercover Ben Cooper persona, now necessarily irrevocably compromised to the immediate tactical team, was positioned with the primary entry element just out of direct sight of Agnes's front windows. He was providing real-time intelligence via a secure comms link, his voice a low, steady presence in the ears of the HRT commander. Basement access is on the west side, through those slanted storm doors. Still padlocked. Child was vocalizing heavily approximately 10, now closer to 20 minutes ago. Sounds have diminished, possibly ceased. This is a critical concern. Suspect Agnes Sterling, last seen through the sunroom window, rear of the house, appears calm, unaware. He felt a fresh stab of anxiety. Sounds have diminished. That could mean anything, none of it good. FBI police open the door. We have a warrant. The command boomed, amplified, shattering the afternoon quiet, followed by a single powerful percussive ram, strike to Agnes's ornate front door. The wood splintered inwards with a sickening crack. Agents flooded the house, a disciplined, fast-moving tide of black-clad figures' weapons, up clearing rooms with practiced shouted commands. FBI, show me your hands. Sorry, clear. Clear left. Agnes Sterling, startled from her tranquil reading, her iced tea sloshing, appeared in the hallway leading from the sunroom, her face a mask of shocked, incredulous outrage. She was secured gently but firmly before she could fully comprehend the whirlwind that had just engulfed her home. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice, usually so controlled and imperious, now trembling with a potent mixture of fury and nascent fear. "I am Agnes Sterling. You can't just barge into my home like this. This is an outrage. I demand to speak to your superior." "FBI, ma'am, we have reason to believe there's an endangered child on these premises." An agent stated calmly, his voice, even his weapons, still trained on the general area, though not directly at her now that she was restrained. "A child? That's preposterous. There are no children here except that Williams boy, and he shouldn't have been on my property." Simultaneously, another HRT team, Ben with them, breached the basement storm doors. The heavy brass padlock snapped like a twig under the immense force of industrial-sized bolt cutters. The wooden doors were thrown open, revealing a set of steep, rickety wooden stairs leading down into a dark, damp, musty-smelling abyss. "Ethan," Ben called, his voice sharp, echoing in the oppressive darkness. "Ethan, can you hear me? It's okay, we're here to help." A small, almost inaudible whimpering sound, like a wounded animal, came from a far, shadowed corner of the basement. Flashlight beams sliced through the gloom, dancing over dusty shelves, old furniture draped in white sheets and cobwebs thick as shrouds. They found him. Ethan was huddled behind an old, rusted water heater, his small body curled into a tight ball, shaking uncontrollably. His face, when the light found, it was tear-streaked pale and smudged with dirt in the beam of their tactical flashlights. His eyes were wide with terror, unfocused. He was terrified, disoriented, clearly traumatized, but Ben noted, with a profound gut-wrenching surge of relief, he appeared to be physically unharmed, though his breathing was shallow and rapid. An HRT medic, an agent with specialized child crisis training, moved forward slowly, gently speaking in soft, reassuring tones, his weapon slung his hands visible and open. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. You're safe now. We're the good guys." Ethan flinched at the approach, but didn't cry out. He just trembled. Maya Williams, alerted by a frantic call from a neighbor who had seen the unbelievable commotion, and then officially more calmly by a uniformed sheriff's deputy, dispatched to her door, arrived on the scene. She ran down Willow Lane, her face a vortex of raw terror, desperate hope, and utter bewilderment. When she saw Ben, her quiet, reclusive neighbor, Ben Cooper, now wearing a discreet FBI windbreaker over his casual clothes, clearly in a position of authority conferring with armed agents, her confusion was palpable, a question mark in her wide, frightened eyes. But all that vanished, eclipsed by a tidal wave of raw maternal instinct, when a paramedic, the HRT medic, gently carried Ethan out of Agnes Sterling's house, wrapped in a thick, warm blanket. "Ethan, oh my baby, my sweet boy." Maya cried, her voice breaking with an explosion of emotion, relief, anguish, love. She rushed forward, pushing past a startled deputy, and enveloped her son in a desperate, all-consuming loving embrace, burying her face in his hair, her body shaking with sobs. Ethan, still dazed, clung to her, his small hands gripping her shirt with surprising strength, a silent testament to his ordeal. The sight of their reunion, raw and powerful, caused even some of the hardened agents to look away, a lump in their throats. Ethan was immediately assessed more thoroughly by the waiting paramedics in a nearby ambulance. He was dehydrated and terrified, but miraculously physically uninjured. He was then reunited fully with Maya, the overwhelming relief of that moment, a palpable force, even amidst the flashing emergency lights and the controlled, somber chaos of an active federal crime scene. Agnes Sterling, her face a grotesque contortion of disbelief, sputtering indignation, and impotent rage, was formally arrested. She was read her Miranda rights in a clear, firm voice by a stern-faced female agent, the words a stark, legalistic counterpoint to the emotional reunion happening just yards away. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Agnes listened, her expression hardening into one of utter contempt. "This is a travesty of justice. I was protecting my property. That boy is a menace." She was then escorted handcuffed to a waiting unmarked federal vehicle and transported to a secure federal holding facility. Her immaculate, obsessively maintained home, the very symbol of her oppressive, tyrannical reign in Cedar Ridge, was now cordoned off with bright yellow crime scene tape, already swarming with forensic investigators meticulously gathering evidence. The quiet, orderly, perfectly controlled world she had fought so obsessively, so cruelly to maintain, had been irrevocably shattered by her own monstrous, hateful actions. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had often kowtowed to Agnes, whispered to another, her voice trembling, I always knew there was something off about her, but this, locking up a child." Another, Mr. Davies, who had once had a run-in with Agnes over the precise shade of his mailbox, just shook his head, his face pale. "Power like that, it corrupts, absolutely." The news of a major FBI raid in the heart of upscale tranquil Cedar Ridge preserved the subsequent arrest of a prominent, socially powerful HOA figure for the kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment of an autistic black child in her basement, exploded into a national, then international, media firestorm. The story was a horrifying, almost unbelievable confluence of unchecked privilege, insidious prejudice, and a sickening abuse of power. Cedar Ridge, Preserve, once a symbol of affluent exclusivity, became the unwilling, embarrassed epicenter of a fierce national conversation. The incident threw a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on HOA overreach, on the often invisible undercurrents of ableism and racism that could fester beneath a veneer of suburban politeness, and on the profound vulnerability of disabled children in communities that sometimes valued rigid conformity and property values above basic human compassion and decency. Ben Carter's role, initially kept discreet to protect his ongoing primary investigation, eventually became public knowledge, though carefully managed. The official narrative crafted by the Bureau's Public Affairs Office attributed the initial alert to an off-duty FBI agent who heroically witnessed a crime in progress and took immediate action, a partial truth designed to safeguard the integrity of his still active primary mission as much as possible. The press, however, dug, and the quiet software developer who was really a G-man became a minor sensation, a detail that made Ben wince every time he saw it. His anonymity was a shield now dented. Agnes Sterling's interrogation, conducted over several days in the sterile, impersonal environment of a federal interview room, was a chilling, deeply disturbing descent into a mind warped by profound entitlement, deep-seated prejudice, and an almost pathological need for control. She initially denied everything, with a theatrical display of indignation and wounded pride. She attempted to portray herself as the victim, a concerned elderly citizen, merely trying to manage a disruptive and potentially dangerous child whose mother was, in Agnes's venomous words, clearly negligent and unfit. That boy was always running wild, she insisted, her voice dripping with disdain. He needed discipline. His mother clearly wasn't providing it. I was simply trying to ensure the safety and tranquility of our community, a community I've dedicated my life to preserving. Sasapsayam. When confronted with Ben's eyewitness testimony and the physical evidence, the padlock, the state of the basement, Ethan's terrified condition, she shifted tactics. She tried to feign confusion, hinting at memory lapses, trying to appear as a frail, misunderstood old woman. But as the interrogators, patient but relentless, pressed her, her composure began to crack. Not into remorse, but into flashes of startling, ugly rage. She expressed no genuine remorse for Ethan's terror, no empathy for Maya's anguish, only a simmering, bitter outrage at her arrest, her humiliation, and a steadfast, unshakable belief that her actions were somehow justified, necessary, even to protect the peace, the order, and the property values of Cedar Ridge. Her statements, meticulously recorded, were laced with racist and ableist undertones, revealing the ugly bigotry that festered beneath her polished exterior. "People like them don't belong here," she muttered at one point, forgetting the microphone. "They bring everything down." During a search of her home, investigators found journals, decades of them. They painted a picture of a woman obsessed with control, with appearances, with a rigid, unforgiving vision of order. There were also entries more cryptic, hinting at a past sorrow. A younger sister, perhaps, or another child in her distant past who had been difficult, a burden, an embarrassment, and who had been sent away. The parallels, the possible projection of old traumas onto young Ethan, were chilling. It wasn't just about property values. It was about an old, unhealed wound, a deeply buried resentment now metastasized into monstrous action. This hidden pain didn't excuse her actions, but it added a layer of tragic, twisted complexity to her motivations. She showed no understanding that her standards had become a weapon. The legal consequences for Agnes Sterling were swift and severe. Facing a battery of federal charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment of a minor resulting in trauma and hate crime enhancements, due to the clear racial and disability-based animus demonstrated by her actions and her statements, she was swiftly indicted by a federal grand jury. The evidence against her was overwhelming, irrefutable. Ben Carter's precise, credible eyewitness testimony. Forensic findings from her basement, including Ethan's small, frightened fingerprints on the dusty walls. Statements from other Cedar Ridge residents, now emboldened to speak, detailing her prior campaign of harassment against the Williams family and others who had dared to deviate from her rigid norms. Her own damning words during the interrogation. Her high-priced legal team attempted to argue diminished capacity, citing her age and her overzealous commitment to community well-being, but the prosecution, led by a sharp, determined assistant U.S. attorney, systematically dismantled these defenses. Agnes Sterling was convicted on all counts. The judge, in sentencing her, spoke of the profound betrayal of trust and the chilling cruelty of her actions against a vulnerable child. She received a lengthy federal prison sentence, effectively ensuring she would never again terrorize any community or any child. Her considerable assets, her wealth amassed through inheritance and shrewd investments, were frozen. A significant portion was eventually awarded to the Williams family in a subsequent successful civil suit, a measure of financial justice, though no amount of money could erase the trauma. The Cedar Ridge incident, the basement nanny case, as some tabloids luridly dubbed it, became a watershed moment, a grim catalyst for change. Congressional hearings were convened fueled by public outrage and intense media scrutiny to investigate the systemic issues of unchecked HOA power and the disturbing lack of adequate oversight that allowed such egregious abuses to occur in communities across the nation. Spurred by tireless public advocacy from disability rights groups, civil liberties organizations, and Maya Williams herself, who found an unexpected strength in speaking out, new federal legislation informally, and then formally dubbed Ethan's Law, was drafted and eventually passed with bipartisan support. It established stricter national standards for HOA governance, mandated transparency, and provided explicit, robust protections against discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, disability, and familial status within planned communities. Crucially, it also created clearer reporting mechanisms and federal investigative pathways for severe abuses of power and civil rights violations committed by HOAs or their representatives. The Williams family, though deeply profoundly traumatized by their horrific ordeal, found themselves surrounded by an unexpected, overwhelming outpouring of support, kindness, and compassion from across the country and even around the world. Maya, with quiet grace, remarkable courage, and unwavering dignity, became a powerful, eloquent advocate for autistic children and for systemic reforms to protect vulnerable families from prejudice and abuse. Ethan's slowly, painstakingly recovering with intensive therapy, the steadfast, unwavering love of his mother, and the support of a caring new community, they eventually moved to become an unwitting, poignant symbol of resilience, his spirit, though battered, unbroken. They chose a new home far from Cedar Ridge, a place where difference was celebrated, not feared. Special Agent Ben Carter. Ben Cooper faded back into the deep shadows of his ongoing undercover work. His role in the Cedar Ridge takedown, a closed, officially lauded chapter, albeit one that left an indelible, unsettling mark on his psyche. He'd saved a child, brought a monster to justice, and inadvertently sparked national reform. Yet the ease with which such darkness had festered in so perfect a place troubled him. It was a stark reminder that the enemies he hunted weren't always in shadowy, distant cells. Sometimes they were hiding in plain sight behind meticulously manicured lawns and facades of respectability. The incident had complicated his primary mission, forcing a temporary relocation of his base, adding layers of new caution. But it had also, in a strange way, reaffirmed his core commitment, the reason he joined the Bureau in the first place, to protect the innocent, to stand against a different kind of terror. The quiet, formerly oppressive streets of Cedar Ridge Preserve underwent a profound, painful, and ultimately transformative period of self-reflection and change. The HOA was entirely restructured, its old guard, including those who had passively enabled Agnes's tyranny, swept away in a wave of resident disgust and activism. New leaders, humbled and genuinely committed to creating an authentically inclusive, tolerant, and compassionate environment, stepped forward. The silence in Cedar Ridge was different now. It was no longer the stifling, fearful quiet of enforced conformity and unspoken anxieties. It was the thoughtful, sometimes uncomfortable quiet of a community grappling with its own complicity, its own prejudices, and striving, however imperfectly, for redemption and genuine healing. The haunting image of Ethan Williams, small and terrified in that dark, dank basement, served as a stark, powerful, and enduring reminder. A reminder that evil in its many insidious guises could wear the most respectable, most ordinary of disguises, and that the fight for justice, for basic human decency, often began with the courage of one individual to see what others ignored, to hear what others dismissed, and to act decisively when a child's voice cried out in the encroaching darkness. The outcome was a testament not just to the efficacy of law enforcement, but to the profound power of one individual's conscience, one mother's love, and one child's unwitting bravery, leading to not just the rescue of a single boy, but to systemic changes that would hopefully protect countless others from similar nightmares. The fight was far from over, Ben knew, but for Ethan at least, a measure of peace had been won, and that for now had to be enough.